church. Here we are in 2 Samuel 23 and 24, closing off another book of the Old Testament. And what a beautiful passage today. I want to point out a couple things. When you read through 2 Samuel 23, here's a story about these mighty men of David and in his army and all of their exploits. And put yourself in that story and just allow yourself to be impressed by the work of these guys and all of their exploits. And as we think, man, these are commendable men. They stood and they fought. These are men of honor. And it is actually even a privilege to talk about them today. And I'm looking forward to meeting them one day. And this is a kind of instructing for us because it reminds us of Hebrews chapter 11, which is another chapter all about men of renown. In that case, men of faith. Men who didn't just fight with swords and spears, but men who fought the right fight, fought the good fight, like Paul did. And it lists many men who fought out of faith. Church, Ephesians 6 calls us to put on the full armor of God, and when we have done everything, to be standing. Just like these guys, if you look at verse 9 till about verse 12, they also fought, and then when the fighting was over, they were the ones still standing. Everyone else had fled, but they were the ones who stood and fight. Church, you could park there with Lord and say, Lord, do I have the resolve in me to, in your power, stand and fight like these men did, and like Hebrews 11, those men did? Ask the Lord that question. And then you'll notice in verse 8, it talks about these are the names of David's mighty men. That word mighty, if you look at the Hebrew definition of that word, it means a proven warrior. And you know who our best example of that is? In Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. It's a famous verse that foreshadows who Jesus will be. And it says, it calls him, one of the names he gets is mighty God. That word mighty is the same Hebrew word. Jesus is the best proven warrior ever. And once again, he is our best example. And so if we want to know how to fight like these guys fought, and we want to apply that to our lives today, we have to think, how would Jesus do it? And how did Jesus fight the good fight of the faith? And then you could ask Jesus this question. I want to fight like you fought. Help me do that today. And I know that's not a question, but just spend some time with the Lord on that today. Then we get into chapter 24. Right out of the gate, I want to tell you, this chapter is a chapter about, especially verse 1 to 16, is a chapter or a story about motive. Okay? And I want to explain something. There's somewhat of a troubling verse here in verse 1. It says the Lord, in his anger, burned against Israel, and he incited David against them. Go and take a census. And if you looked at 1 Chronicles chapter 21, that same correlating verse would say that it was Satan who incited David to take the census. And how do you land that, church? Quite simply, actually, you just admit that God is sovereign over the whole thing. That's how you land it. And so then what we see happen here is that God doesn't have a problem so much with what David did. The taking of the census isn't so much the problem. It's what was happening in David's heart when he decided to take the census, and that's the problem. This is a story about motive. And how do we know that? Maybe based on three things. First of all, in Numbers chapter 1, God told Moses to take a census of the army. And he told him, just after they got out of Egypt, he said, take a census of the whole army. 40 years later, just before they get into the promised land, he tells them in Numbers chapter 26, he tells them again, take a census of the army. And he had purpose for it. And here David's doing the same thing, but from a very different motive. And Joab was even picking up on it. Here in chapter 24, verse 3, Joab finds it repulsive that David would even take this census. He knows that there's something wrong with David's motives here, and Joab knows it. He doesn't even want to finish taking the census. And so this is quite convicting for you and I, because you and I can do things that on the outside look good. It might even be something that someone else has actually done the same thing and God told them to do it, but we're doing it with the wrong motive. Church, it's a little scary, but Proverbs 16 verse 2 says that all a man's ways seem right to him, but the Lord is weighing the heart. 1 Corinthians 4 says that when Jesus comes back, he is going to expose the motives of men's hearts, and that's how he's going to judge them, by the motives of their hearts. You could ask a bit of a scary question to the Lord today, and you could say, Jesus, are my motives pure? And spend some time in a prayer like that with the Lord and just let him reveal it to you. And then in the end of this chapter, you get into a story that wraps up much of the entire Bible. David builds an altar on Araunah's threshing floor. He sees the angel coming up to there. He has a chance. David has already paid a consequence for his sin, but now his consequence doesn't lead him to offer a sacrifice. This desire to be in a relationship with the Lord and to know that that only comes through a blood sacrifice is why he offers a sacrifice on Araunah's threshing floor. That is what he is going, that's why David would tell Solomon in 1 Chronicles 21 that on this place, Solomon, this is where you build the temple. And then we know that for hundreds of years on that same place, not only did David offer a blood sacrifice, but people came to the temple at that place to offer blood sacrifices. We also know that fast forward many hundred years later, Jesus died on the cross on that same hill for you and I, offering the most precious blood sacrifice ever. Church, celebrate that with Jesus today in one way, shape, or form, but don't be shy about it.